All right, everybody, welcome back to the FITSNews studios, another edition of your Week in Review. I am Will Folks, the owner, founding editor of FITSNews.com. We've got a ton to cover this week. A story out of Greenville County, South Carolina, heartbreaking. An 8-year-old student who escaped from an elementary school and was found dead 4 hours later. Jen Wood and I are going to delve into this sad saga of Leo Cervantes. We've also got updates on the Murdoch saga, a consolidation to discuss, as well as a badge gone boom in Kershaw County, South Carolina. Andy Fancher and I are going to talk about a police officer who was held accountable for his misconduct in office. I'm also going to sit down with Dylan Nolan to recap a huge week in the 2024 election and some implications that it could have on races here in South Carolina. We're also going to talk about a big Supreme Court decision and its potential fallout as it relates to the Republican-controlled General Assembly and policies they may pass in the coming year. All that and more is headed your way on the Week in Review. So the big story this week, a tragedy in South Carolina's upstate. 8-year-old Lionel Cervantes, a second grader at Bells Crossing Elementary School in Simpsonville, South Carolina. Lionel went missing at 11:10 a.m., ran from the school, according to staff at Bells Crossing. 4 hours later, his body was found in a pond in a nearby residential area, approximately 1,200 feet from where he was last seen at the school. This, Jen Wood, a story that has pulled at heartstrings across the country. And before we dive into this, Jen, I do want to point out, you and I are both parents of kids who are on the autism spectrum, as Cervantes was. And so this is something that hits us pretty close, but we hope to bring that passion to the story, but we also, more importantly, hope to bring the objectivity as we seek the truth about what happened. And Jen, right now, there are a ton of questions about what happened, aren't there?
Yeah, we definitely have more questions than we do answers, as is common at this point in a story. But, we are actively submitting FOIAs to try to, seek those answers out.
Yeah, and we're looking at the coroner's office up there. We want to get all that information. We want certainly everything we can get from the school district regarding what transpired, and of course the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. I do want to point out that, we talked just a moment ago about Leo Cervantes going missing at 11:10 a.m. Within half an hour, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office did have a notice on social media up there. It was quickly picked up by media, and so this was a well-advertised missing child. Again, unfortunately, the outcome of the investigation, not what anybody was hoping for. But Jen, as we dig into what happened here, I wanted to cite something from the school's statement that I found particularly interesting. It referenced the fact that appropriate members of district staff had received training related to elopements or kids running away. But the statement didn't say whether or not any of the staff at Bells Crossing who were involved in this particular incident had received that training, whether they acted in accordance with that training, or for that matter, what that training was. Did that strike you as a bit interesting in the statement, Jen?
Yeah, definitely very carefully worded. Obviously they're dotting all their I's, crossing their T's in preparation for potential legal action by his family. But yeah, they did not get into specifics regarding who received that training and when.
Well, Jen, on the evening that this happened, Lionel's mother, Dahlia Cervantes, just posted a emotional video of her son remembering his life. Let's look at that just real quick, Jen. But there was one line I really wanted to zero in on here, Jen, and this was from Dahlia's statement. Quote, negligence caused his death. That's right out of the gate, Jen, a very bold claim And obviously, we're going to see legal action in this case, and the school district's response clearly preemptive and in attempting to sort of set some parameters pushing back against that. But it's hard, Jen, in situations like this because we don't know at this point what happened. That's why we're sending all these FOIAs. That's why we're asking all these pointed questions. And by the way, we have already heard back from the sheriff's office. They are welcoming any FOIAs that we send. They said they're going to send us everything that they can on it. Certainly, that's been their MO. We will wait to hear what the coroner has to say regarding anything in the potential cause of death. We don't know exactly what happened in those 4 hours that Leo was missing. But Jen, as we look at the school, it seems like all the focus is on the school and how this child managed to get out, how he managed to evade, as Sheriff Lewis said, and then how he managed to scale that fence and get so far away so quickly. As you read this and follow these reports, Jen, and look at these statements, what do you think happened at this point?
There's a lot of questions, when it comes to the school policies. And, he was inside the school and took off and managed to get outside of the school. And, how did that happen? How was he able to get so far so fast? I mean, I know when we were struggling with elopement issues with my son, that kid was fast. That kid was smart. I mean, there was no lock that could keep him in. It was scary. But, I know the staff right now there must just be brokenhearted. But, as you look at situations like this, you really want to, look at it constructively and look at the policies and procedures that can be put in place to prevent this from ever happening again. So it's a tough conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to be had.
No, you're right. And again, we're going to dig into every aspect of this. We're going to look at the school's preparation for situations like this. We're going to look at how that training that these appropriate staff allegedly had, we're going to look at how that played out. We're going to look at whatever information we can get about the precise circumstances regarding Leo's escape from the school. And certainly we're going to look at law enforcement's response and anything we can deduce from the coroner's report. Certainly this is going to be something that we're going to be focused on, not only, Jen, as it relates to this case, but as you just mentioned, what steps can we take to try and keep this from happening again in the future? Because again, an absolutely heartbreaking story up there in the South Carolina upstate. Jen, I know you'll be digging harder than ever on a story like this, given how close it is to your heart. But I also know, as you've done in all the other stories we've covered, you're going to let what you find, the facts that you uncover, guide where this story goes. So just can't thank you enough for being a part of our effort on this, Jen.
Absolutely.
Jen, before we cut out of here, I wanted to ask you, there was some news this past week on another story that we've been following, that a lot of folks have been following, the story of Alec Murdaugh. Again, it's one that has drawn international attention for years now. It's been years that this story has been dominating news cycles, but there was a development in this case. We've been looking all last week for a filing in the South Carolina Supreme Court regarding the egg juror, Myra Crosby, regarding files related to her dismissal from the jury that ultimately convicted Alec Murdaugh. Her decisive dismissal, by the way, because had that not happened, it was more than likely that Murdaugh, that trial would have ended in a hung jury. They would have had to make the decision whether or not to try him again for murder. But the decisive dismissal of Myra Crosby has remained a mystery. She has come out with some very specific allegations alleging a conspiracy to take her off of that panel, one involving Becky Hill, the disgraced Colleton County Clerk of Court who's been accused of jury tampering in the Murdaugh trial. But we saw some developments on that this week. Jen, walk us through what happened when you went looking at the Supreme Court for this filing.
Right. So we knew that Myra's attorney, Joe McCulloch, was planning to file a motion with the Supreme Court to unseal the documents and the transcripts related to Myra's dismissal. He had mentioned that in prior interviews, so we knew it was coming. He had already filed one with the Circuit Court, but since the Supreme Court was taking over jurisdiction, had planned to file one there. And, we did see an order within the filing system that the defense and the state were to return their replies to a petition and motion filed within 10 days, but the motion wasn't there. So fortunately, our Dylan Nolan was downtown covering the Bowen Turner hearing in the Court of Appeals and stopped by the clerk's office to inquire about it. And that motion that Joe McCulloch has filed has been sealed.
Wow. Yeah, they gave Dylan an email address and said, hey, you can ask for it officially here, but you're not going to get it. So, wow. But Jen, a lot of this may have just become a moot point because it appears the Supreme Court is rolling all things Murdoch into one hearing. There was a motion submitted by the state of South Carolina. We hadn't seen this yet, but the Supreme Court granted it to consolidate Murdoch's appeal. Now, we're still trying to get a full picture of what this means, but you looked at that ruling from the court earlier this week, Jen. What do you make of it?
Basically, the state was asking the Supreme Court to consolidate all of Murdoch's appeal issues into one case. And that is not uncommon. It's not a unique circumstance. It's often done for, save judicial resources. But Murdoch's attorneys had filed a motion objecting to that based on the fact that, they believe that the jury tampering case is of great public interest and that consolidating it would take too long, because we're talking about all of the issues that they want to bring up in their appeal. They have to create one big filing with all of those issues in one. And the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to consolidate these, and your filing is due December 10th.
Wow. And to be clear, when we talk about Alec Murdaugh's broader appeal, this is the questions over whether or not all of the financial crime info should have been admitted into the trial, which I think at the time we pretty much argued that, hey, the defense kind of did open the door to that. Prosecution kind of kicked it in, maybe, but I don't fault Judge Clifton Newman for that decision at all. And I think once that door was opened, I think all of that financial information, which was incredibly damning, which had a huge impact on those jurors, that was coming in at that point.
Right.
But the question, Jen, then falls back to Becky Hill and the comments she made to these jurors and whether those violated Alec Murdaugh's Sixth Amendment right to an impartial jury. Jen, do you think folding all of this into one big ball of wax, do you think that helps Murdaugh's bid for a new trial? Do you think it hurts it?
I don't know that it does either. I'm not sure. I just don't know how to answer that. I think it certainly is, it's going to lengthen the process. Obviously, if the first brief isn't due until December, we likely won't see any movement on this until next year.
Yeah. Well, we could all use a break from Murdaugh court filings. I know I, for one, could use a break from them, but obviously we would remind our audience that whatever happens at the state level as it relates to Alec Murdaugh's appeal, he will have a very compelling case on the jury tampering allegations before the federal court. Although, Jen, we have heard, we got one of our sources that chimed in recently, and we're doing some digging on this, putting forward the theory that the Fourth Circuit may not be as inclined as we have thought to give Murdoch a new trial, arguing that those courts really, really want to adhere to state rulings and state interpretations, if at all possible. Jen, your thoughts on that?
That's anything can happen in appeals court. I think it really depends on who's hearing it, and anything really could happen. You never know, but I just strongly believe that they do have a very solid case with the jury tampering. I really do. It's hard to get past court officials.
Yeah.
Multiple jurors saying court officials talk to them about the merits of the case.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was game, set, match at that evidentiary hearing back in January. But obviously, we will keep a very close eye on it. Jen, you've done amazing work on that case from the beginning. And Jen, certainly, as we continue to follow this case in Greenville, the death of 8-year-old Leo Cervantes, I hope you will continue to bring that same passion, that same elbow grease digging into these files that you've been doing with Murdoch, because again, this is a case that just absolutely demands answers. Jen, thank you so much for your work on it.
Always. Thanks for having me.
Rolling the rip. Badger's gone. Boom. We've got a case out of Kershaw County that occupied our Andy Fancher's whole week last week. You were in Kershaw. Actually, let's get into this. You were prohibited from leaving the courtroom at one point during this trial?
That is correct. During our month in review, I had actually referred to some of the courtroom deputies. They secured me a jury room. I had my computer set up. I was totally prepared to join y'all on the weekend review to talk about the great porn caper of Spartanburg County, as well as the case I was covering. But alas, the doors were locked and I could not leave.
Well, we are just glad. We were taking bets in the office whether or not we're going to have to post bail for you, Andy. So glad you were able to eventually get out.
Don't rule that off the table just yet, though.
Yeah. The over-under for the rest of the year is still, the money's not really on your side on that. Let's talk about this case, though. This was a police brutality case, a misconduct in office case. You've been following it closely, but there are a lot of layers to this case. Walk us through what happened in Kershaw County, Andy.
Sure. What happened in Kershaw County last week was essentially the end of a story that has been snowballing since about 2021, when former Kershaw County Sheriff's Office Deputy Jonathan Goldsmith was terminated for reasons involving misconduct. Well, he was more so arrested by SLED following his termination in January of 2021.
So what did he do?
So it all went down on October 15th, 2020, and we no longer need to say allegedly because the jury found him guilty. He assaulted Tony Sims during a botched apprehension in the parking lot of a church. Goldsmith, according to his boss, Sheriff Lee Bone, was where he was supposed to be. Tony Sims was, according to Sheriff Lee Bone, not where he was supposed to be. And what happened after that was, nothing short of pummeling and assault. Tony Sims, when inquired about being detained with his left arm behind him, rather large individual, turns over to former Deputy Goldsmith, asks him, "What did I do wrong?" At that point in time, he is taken to the ground. He has struck what appears to be about 5 times towards
while on the ground.
While on his ground, either towards or on the face, resulting in a fracture on the left and right side of his jawbone, every tooth knocked out of his mouth. But Goldsmith didn't stop there. After meandering to his patrol car and radioing to dispatch that he's taking a little nap, he goes back over to Sims, who's laying in a pool of his own blood at this point, and orders this man to stand up on his feet. Pulls this guy up, to which he falls back to the pavement. And now Goldsmith is really agitated, picks him back up, pushes him over into his patrol car, this bloody, battered Goldsmith with a broken jaw on 2 sides of his face, right? And this is when the battering really starts. Goldsmith hasn't even gotten started yet, as his body-worn camera expressly reveals. He tased the man when he didn't put his foot in the patrol car. He pepper sprayed the man when he wouldn't put his feet into the patrol car. He slams the man's legs and feet into the patrol car, and then Goldsmith climbs into the patrol car.
Good God.
Only then does EMS arrive about 13 minutes into the assault that the jury determined was in fact an assault. And he tells Sims, as EMS is surrounding his patrol car, "This is all your fault." So that's what happened on October 15th.
Now, in this story, you dug into kind of the culture of this sheriff's office, and there was a video that we obtained through court filings. Now,
Correct.
These are civil court filings. They weren't allowed to discuss this stuff in the trial because they were only focusing on the criminal allegations against
the events of October 15th, 2020. They did not want to taint the jury with any evidence, any series of public court filings that we pulled from the public index. All they were focused on was, again, the events of October 15th, 2020. And in fact, the prosecution throughout the 4-day trial, they maintained that Goldsmith was one bad actor, that this was not the state versus Sheriff Lee Bone. It was not the state versus the Kershaw County Sheriff's Office. It was the state versus Goldsmith. But in the article that we published just this week, it appears as though it's more than just Goldsmith responsible for these actions. And yeah, let's toss to the video that, according to publicly accessible court filings, Sheriff Lee Bone made when he was captain over at Camden PD, Camden Police Department, over Goldsmith.
Let's take a look.
On test to run up in your stand like, yeah, here comes the, no, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, yeah, here comes the, no, here comes the, oh, here comes the, y'all don't really want it like, yeah, here comes the, no, here comes the, oh.
Oh, Andy, first of all, as a South Carolina Gamecock fan, I'm offended that DJ Swearinger's hit on Andre Ellington in the Clemson Carolina game back in 2012 wasn't in that clip. That should have been in there. But anyway, obviously, the allegation that the sheriff made this, that was actually, did he admit this apparently in connection with the lawsuit?
According to the filings we have, he admitted it. And it was about a year into litigation that attorneys finally found this Goldsmith's Greatest Hit video on the sheriff's personal iPad. They furthermore uncovered that the sheriff had violated CPD policy to pull that Axon body camera of Goldsmith pummeling a civilian. That would have been in about 2018. Mm-hmm. And they furthermore uncovered that then Captain Lee Bone oversaw a use of force review board at that time. This is while he was running for sheriff, mind you, where he said, hey, you know, we're all going to acknowledge that Goldsmith has quite a bit of excessive use of force documents here, but we don't think it rises to anything criminal here, so we're just going to refer him over to some de-escalation training that Goldsmith never took, and he'll be good to go.
You know, watching that video, though, I don't know whether to be mad at him or like try to hire him to do some graphic editing around
The
here.
timing is magnificent.
It's pretty well done.
It's not bad.
Let me ask you this, though. The sheriff took the stand in this trial, didn't he? Walk us through a little bit of that layer of this case.
Sure. So he took the stand right before Goldsmith took the stand. He was called by the state as a credible witness, and he was joined by approximately 15 deputies who conveniently set themselves behind the defense table, which is an interesting sight for the jury, don't you think? He took the stand, and rather than prosecutors asking him about his categorical relationship documented through litigation with Goldsmith, they asked him to read KCSO's department policy, philosophy, oath, not really asking any head-on questions about his deputy. And you could tell that Sheriff Bone had major hesitation in saying anything negative about his deputy. In fact, under cross-examination, he said that Goldsmith was a good deputy.
Well, we got a clip from his testimony.
Yeah, here's a side-by-side of his testimony and then him reacting to the body-worn camera that, according to him, is really unclear at times. Yeah, let's take a look.
We know we're living in a world now with body cameras, dash cam, there's cameras everywhere these days, cameras in the courtroom. I always tell my guys that shy of Jesus Christ walking through the front office, I'll never hire a perfect deputy.
Get up, man. What do you want me to do for you? Stand up, man.
I don't know any other profession that wears body cameras with everything they do and has to be accountable for everything they do. We've all been in situations where we get real angry, real mad, and later on when we calm down, we realize that we wish we hadn't done what we done.
Get in the car.
When someone doesn't comply, when someone resists, there's going to be force used, and it's never a beautiful thing. This case here, not only was backup not called, it was turned down when it was offered.
They can't do shit.
I have no problem with him trying to help him up to sit him in the car where it may be more comfortable than laying on the ground. So that goes back to what I said earlier about not being able to defend any action after the handcuffs. Is really no more force should have been used after that point.
Last one. You're gonna get sprayed. Get in there.
I mean, it looks like he was on his back, and sometimes it looks like he might have been on his side. It's just it's a hard call there. I mean, y'all saw the same video I saw.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right, thank you, Sheriff. Let me step down, sir. And the state may call the next one.
What you got? You okay? I'm fine. He took all the beating.
Is that his blood?
Yeah, all of that. Come on, Bird.
Just making sure.
So, Andy, a little bit of mixed messages there.
Absolutely. And then you start buddying his sworn testimony with the video that was released in increments on a familiar name here, Jeff Maddox's YouTube page starting in 2022.
Guy's on top of it.
I mean, Jeff Maddox. Don't mess with the Maddox, right?
Jeff Maddox in every city, man.
Yeah,
That guy's on top.
for those not aware, he was the fellow who recently ran for anarchist of Kershaw County Council and lost, but nonetheless, we're still here, and
Drops
so
in
is
here
he.
from time to time. Always love to see him.
Every once in a while, right? So what he obtained was about a 47-minute recording. This was back in 2022 of Sheriff Bone going on a bit of a tirade about the ongoing litigations. Because remember, the KCSO, they succumbed to about 5 lawsuits. And I know that at least 4 of them ruled in the plaintiff's favor, all alleging assaults and constitutional violations upon Goldsmith. So what Maddox put out was, again, a tirade, hidden camera recorded tirade of Bone slamming the Fifth Circuit Solicitor's Office, the ones who ultimately appear to have worked with him during his testimony, as well as defending Goldsmith the whole time. Like, oh, knocking that guy's teeth out, I can defend that. I hate this for Goldsmith.
Now, there was a pivotal moment, though, in this trial where Solicitor Byron Gibson, he is the Fifth Circuit Solicitor. This is the top guy. This is not farming this case out. The guy, the man himself, the Fifth Circuit Solicitor, examining the deputy on this. Walk us through what happened on the stand, Andy. There was a real aha moment in this trial, wasn't there?
All right. Well, so there were a few aha moments, but I'm not sure there was one that takes the cake as this one does, where he leaves Goldsmith absolutely speechless. So what Solicitor Gibson did was he, of course, admitted Goldsmith's incident report of the assault of Sims into evidence, and he had him read from the incident report. And in fact, there were a few inaccuracies in there. Goldsmith denied using his police baton, to which the jury was provided video of him prodding the suspect with a police baton. He alleged that he was being elbowed by Sims and that he was trying to turn down being spit, and that Sims was allegedly and of course none of that was recorded either here or in the incident report. But the aha moment had to have been when he asked Goldsmith, how many times did you strike Sims once you took him to the ground? And let's just take a look.
Slapped him one time in front of the brachial strike, right? That's one. Correct?
Correct.
And according to your report, you struck him 2 more times, right?
Says in the report 3.
All right. So
One to the abdomen and 2 to the side of the neck.
okay. You play that. One, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh,
We don't see 5. I'm sorry.
yeah, that. Go ahead, sir.
Do you have 5? Do you
Sir?
see 5?
No, there's not a 5th.
I say, Andy, we had badges gone bad, badges gone wild, badges gone boom. But I think in this case, one of the things that you pointed out is that this was more of a cultural thing than just one officer misbehaving. As you look across the state of South Carolina, all these different law enforcement agencies, obviously we got a ton of cops that do the right thing in these situations. They get hostile encounters, apprehensions, traffic stops, but they do the right thing. They eliminate the immediate threat and then proceed, to treat their detainees with dignity. Obviously, that did not happen in this case. But as you look across the state and what you're seeing in so many different jurisdictions, is it more a cultural issue or is it more 1 or 2 really bad behaving cops?
It's the thick blue line issue. It's the blue wall of silence. Don't ask, don't tell. And those who do tell are punished for it. We've seen it happen time and time again in Lawrence, We see it happening right now in Spartanburg. And now, here in Kershaw County, we have the highest authority taking pleasure, apparently, in Goldsmith's pummelings. Why else make a video titled Goldsmith's Greatest Hits? And if that is the demeanor and the candor of the sheriff himself, then what do you expect from the department?
Indeed. Andy Fancher, once again, with amazing work holding bad behaving cops in South Carolina accountable. And one other thing I want to point out as we exit this segment, not only your work on the cultural component of this, but just how integral body-worn camera was in this. FITSNews has always pressed for the release of body-worn camera from law enforcement officers. In this case, it came out because it was part of a trial, a criminal trial, but in so many cases, law enforcement agencies have the option not to release that under the incredibly weak body-worn camera law that was passed in South Carolina almost a decade ago. Count on this outlet to continue to push for the release of that footage in all of these situations so we can continue holding bad cops accountable.
We've got Badge Gone Bad, Badge Gone Wild, and as of this week, Badge Gone to Jail.
So as we film this, we are 52 days away from the most consequential election in American history. And if you think that sounds familiar, it's because the last election was also the most consequential in American history, and so was the one before that. But 2024 has been kind of a hold my beer election cycle, Dylan. Unprecedented in multiple respects. We've had indictments, assassination attempts, a coup on the Democratic side, and we have had, for a change, decisive debates. Typically, debates are kind of ho-hum, they're confirmation bias type events, but this cycle, we've had a couple of debates that have really moved the needle, and one of those debates was held this past week. The first, and apparently the only, debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Dylan, I'm going to start with a very simple question. Who won?
Donald Trump says Donald Trump won. Kamala Harris says Kamala Harris won.
Fair enough, but there were some metrics that we follow that moved pretty considerably in the aftermath of the debate, which would lead one following those indicators to conclude that Kamala Harris won. However, we were talking just yesterday, also some polling, particularly some polling released by Trump's own campaign, indicated no, that the needle didn't move perhaps as far as we thought. But walk us through what you saw in the debate. You watched this obviously much closer than I did. Our Mark Powell watched it too. He did a column for our Palmetto Political Stock Index. But what did you see in that debate? Did Trump come off as well as he did in the first debate against Joe Biden, or how did he fare in your estimation?
I mean, you got to say that Trump's debate against Joe Biden was the most decisive victory in a U.S. presidential debate ever. So, no, he did not do as well as that. I don't think Kamala is going to be forced out of running in the race anytime soon after this debate. And I think that Harris, who has, repeatedly issued word salad out of her mouth when in front of a camera, came off as a completely different person and a person that a lot of people could imagine being president after watching that debate.
Word melange, our Mark Powell said. I thought that was a great little phrase. But so she exceeded expectations. Trump let her under his skin a bit, didn't he?
Yeah, the first 15 to 30 minutes of the debate, Trump was really tight. He was, and I think this is paralleled in the Biden debate as well. He was really tight. He was really staying on his issues. But then the combination of his debate with David Muir, the anchor at ABC, who was really his debate partner, and some well-placed blows by Kamala, he started coming a little bit unwound. And I would love to throw to this clip from the debate where Kamala perfectly baits him by talking about his rally size. And of course, he falls right for it. Let's start at this.
And he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics.
Dylan, what is the deal with this guy?
Well, I mean, and this was a question about immigration. This is his best
His
polling
issue,
issue.
exactly.
And he still completely fell for it.
Wow. Well, you made another good point. We were talking offset earlier. You made a great point that when you look at what people are dealing with in America right now, when you look at the issues that are really driving home the decision, or should be driving home this decision, it's inflation. It's the soaring prices of energy, of housing, of food. This issue came up not once in this
So,
debate.
to be fair, both candidates mentioned inflation, but ABC, the host of the debate, neither of their moderators mentioned inflation once. I reviewed the transcript after the debate because I couldn't believe. I thought, okay, I must have missed it. I must have been mentally checked out during that question. No, they didn't ask about it once.
Unbelievable. Let's talk a little bit about the lay of the land in this race. Obviously, well, actually, before we talk about that, let's talk about the big news after the debate. Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris, and not only that, providing links to voter registration sites, which are apparently exploded in the aftermath of this Instagram. I guess she posted on Instagram. I'm not a huge Taylor Swift fan. I more prefer the covers of her songs. What was that guy that covered it? The guy from Whiskey Town? Ryan Adams. That's my jam.
I'll trust you on that one,
I'm
boss.
a boomer, though. Anyway, but she posts her endorsement. All of a sudden, these voter registration sites explode. Even here in South Carolina, a devoutly Republican state, we saw a tenfold, at least, increase in daily online voter registration after Taylor Swift's big thing. Is it going to move the needle? Will Taylor Swift move the needle in the presidential race?
I certainly think that this is going to have an impact. And I mean, to give you some scale, it was reported that within the first 24 hours, there was like 300,000 voter registration. The last election was decided by a number of tens of thousands. So even if the vast majority of those people who registered, and by the way, this was directly after a presidential debate that was watched by 80 million people, so there is a big confounding factor here. We don't know that this is all Taylor Swift.
Fair enough.
But even if a slim percentage of those people show up and vote the way that Taylor told them to, this could flip the election. It has the potential to have a massive impact.
Well, let's talk about the states that are in play here, because obviously the presidential election really isn't decided by the United States of America, the 50 states. It's decided by about 7 different battleground or swing states where the candidates are very close to each other. We're talking about Arizona and Nevada out in the west. We're talking about Georgia and North Carolina here in the south. We're talking about Wisconsin and Michigan up in the Rust Belt, and obviously Pennsylvania, an incredibly critical state.
The keystone state in this election.
Yeah, absolutely. Where were these states before the debate, and where are they now, Dylan?
So that's the interesting thing. The momentum coming into this debate was all on Trump's side. Nate Silver, who is probably one of the most respected election predictors, had Trump's chance of winning at right around 65% prior to this debate. Pennsylvania, the Real Clear Politics polling average right now as we're filming this is plus 4.5 Trump. And for those following the election maps, you know that both candidates' path to victory, but more so Kamala than Trump, flows through Pennsylvania.
This must win.
If you win Pennsylvania, if we see one of these candidates win Pennsylvania, you can pretty much expect them to win this election.
Yeah, that creates a whole set of challenges.
There are non-Pennsylvania paths, but the probability is there that it's going to be Pennsylvania that delivers this election.
Mr. Denny, you're talking about Pennsylvania. We're talking about Georgia, all these swing states. I want to ask you a question about Trump's polling here, because in 2016, in 2020, Trump was trailing in all of these states. He was projected to lose all of them and lose some of them badly. Wisconsin, in fact, was projected to lose in the last election by almost 10 points. Ended up coming within a percentage point. Is the Trump understated polling factor still at play in 2024? A lot of folks say it isn't. What's your take on that? Is Trump still going to outperform the polls?
I think that we're going to see every election cycle until these pollsters invent new methodologies of collecting their data, that the polls are going to become less and less reliable, because right now it relies on people picking up the phone and talking to a pollster. If you think about the folks who are registered by the Taylor Swift voter drive, what percentage of that age block is going to pick up a random phone call and talk to a pollster? Like 0. So as there are more and more younger voters, I think that it's going to be harder and harder to get a good picture of what the election outcome is going to be accurately.
Well, let's look at your crystal ball because you've been pretty solid so far this cycle in your predictions. You correctly predicted Joe Biden was not in the race. Luckily for Joe, he was smart enough to bow out instead of being.
Joe was bowed. He did not make that choice.
But you've had a good crystal ball on this. Again, 52 days away. Where do you see this thing shaking out right now, Dylan?
Last time I was on, you asked me the same question. At that time, the momentum was firmly in Kamala's field. I don't think that this debate was enough to sway the momentum, which, since we last spoke about this, has shifted back towards Trump. I don't think that this debate is going to be enough to permanently alter it. Now, Taylor Swift, I actually think, might have more of an impact than this debate. And the reason I say that is because ABC was so completely and obviously in the tank for one candidate and did not ask questions about the core issues to most people who are voting in this election because they would be obviously damaging to the candidate that they were in favor of. And this is not just me, a partisan, saying this. The New York Times published a story the day after the debate where they had a focus group of 10 undecided voters, people who voted for Republicans and Democrats in past elections and who are likely to vote in this election. And 6 of 10 of those people came out of that debate, one which all the pundits are saying Trump lost, saying that they were more likely to vote for Trump because Kamala didn't bring them policy solutions for their economic problems.
Well, not only that, the policy solutions that she's put forward, a lot of them would run counter to the interest of those folks, particularly as it relates to inflation, particularly as it relates to immigration. I mean,
even if you think Trump is the biggest blowhard on earth, which one could not be, I can understand how a rational human being thinks that. You can't deny that gas was like $1.89 when he was president. You can't deny that food cost, maybe 70% of what it does now, 60%, significantly less though. You can't deny that if you're trying to buy a house, your interest rate was a heck of a lot lower than it's going to be right now. And those are all things that, no matter what is said at a debate, are realities that are going to be baked into this election.
well, and the other reality that's baked into it that a lot of folks in the media aren't talking about, but I think is incredibly important, and that even low information voters can pick up on, is the fact that Kamala Harris has been part of an administration that's been in power for the last nearly 4 years. So all of these things that she's pledging to do on day one, there's a pretty credible argument. Well, Madam Vice President, why hadn't you done them? Because your boss clearly isn't the one in charge. Biden's not the one calling the shots. Speaking of calling the shots, though, before we move on to some state political stuff, I want to ask you about some shot calling in Ukraine. You've been following this thing very closely. We've got a president who's basically spending every other day on the beach, putting on Trump hats, rarely aware of his surroundings. And we are in a situation now in Ukraine where Russia, Ukraine, the battle over there is reaching a point where, Dylan, we could very easily trip our way into a escalating global conflict. Tell us a little bit what you're seeing in Ukraine.
I'm really hoping that that's not the October surprise from hell. But the situation is very tense right now for folks who haven't been following the Ukraine war recently. There's been an offensive by Ukraine, which is undoubtedly done with the help of the Americans, into Russia. They've taken a pretty significant piece of
Kursk, right?
Territory in Kursk Oblast. Russia's a huge country, so it's not like they've seized a ton of territory, but certainly enough that it is eyebrow-raising. And now Anthony Blinken, the United States Secretary of State, is working with the diplomats over in the United Kingdom to authorize Ukraine to strike targets within Russia proper with long-range missiles provided by the United States and provided by the UK. And the other part of that is that they have no way to target where these missiles land because Ukraine doesn't have its own satellites. So necessarily, if they're landing these shots in Russia, that means that they are being guided by EU or United States satellites, which President Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, announced he would consider to be NATO entering the war. So, hopefully he's bluffing, because it certainly seems as though the United States is full steam ahead on allowing these strikes, no matter what he says. He's bluffed a lot of times before in this war, but if he does consider that to be NATO entering the war, we could see very, very bad things in the next couple of weeks here.
Unbelievable. And what a lot of folks don't understand, Dylan, is that this entire conflict in Ukraine originated with basically an American coup.
Yes, in 2014.
Indeed. The country had elected a pro-Russian administration. America didn't like that very much. CIA got together with some actual Nazis in Ukraine, literal actual Nazis, and helped overthrow that democratically elected government. I thought we were making the world safe for democracy, Dylan. Wasn't that
Well, and the ironic thing is that there has not been elections held in Ukraine since the onset of the war because they don't want the people to be able to vote in a government that could change that.
Well, hey, Lindsey Graham's happy this week, right? We're about to have World War III. Lindsey Graham will be thrilled
Oh, I'm
with
sure
that,
he's enjoying this, and it should be noted that United States isn't doing this for no reason. Ukraine sits atop more than $10 trillion of rare earth minerals, which are at play here, specifically in the regions that are being fought over.
Unbelievable. Dylan, great analysis of that. I know you've been following. You did an excellent piece on the Ukraine conflict. I hope we can get you to do another one as this situation obviously reaching a potentially cataclysmic boiling point. But I wanted to shift a little bit back now to South Carolina politics. We've been tracking a lot of the polls in South Carolina as it relates to the state Senate, a very staunchly Republican chamber. The margin right now is, I believe, 30 to 16 Republican. Well, let me rephrase that. There's one independent, but she's retiring. There are multiple Republicans who have been defeated in primaries. They're going to be replaced by, in all likelihood, more conservative members. But then there are about 7 different Senate districts that we've been tracking that are potentially swing districts, including, we're told, at least 3 that Republicans plan on picking up. Now, here's my big question. Let's assume that Republicans expand their supermajority in the state Senate. Let's say it's a 33 to 13 chamber. Let's say they expand that majority in the House. Why are we not seeing more conservative governance in South Carolina with these massive Republican majorities?
Will, you've been living here for 50 years. I think the answer lies in the party switch. And would you mind speaking to the timeline, and how in South Carolina it suddenly became politically not feasible for a lot of people to be Democrats and how those people became Republicans?
Well, I was hoping to make you talk for a minute. But yeah, I mean, back in the 1990s, a lot of Democratic politicians, mostly white Democrats in rural areas, switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. The General Assembly, by the way, for those who don't know, that which wields all the power in South Carolina, used to be exclusively white Democrats. I mean, that was all there was. And now it is shifting to the point where it is vastly, supermajority white Republican with a handful of black Democrats, and it just, it's changed labels, but the governing
there are
philosophy.
still a lot of these people. I mean, the 90s was not that long ago. There's still a lot of these people who are literally the same human beings who used to run as Democrats and who are now Republicans. And, the state's seen a lot of migration in recent years, especially from people who are kind of disaffected Republicans moving out of liberal states who think, oh, great, we've got a Republican supermajority legislature. Well, you have a lot of people who have an R next to their name, and it's really up to you to, and we do as much as we can to help expose how people really vote. But it's up to you if that's something that's important to you to determine, is the person who's representing me in the state house as both my senator and as my House representative, is that person actually the party that they purport to be? There are a lot of Democrats in Republicans' clothing.
Well, and one of the manifestations of that we've seen has been in the appointment of judges, whether it's these judges at the circuit court level who are very inclined, in my view, to give lax sentences, lenient bonds, hall passes, basically to violent criminals. But we also see it at a higher level at the Supreme Court, where we got justices ruling on significant issues of public policy. We had another one of those decisions drop just this week, Dylan, a case involving South Carolina's fledgling school choice program. And when I say fledgling, this is incredibly tiny. We're talking about $30 million out of an education system that spends $14 billion a year on one of the worst public school systems in the entire country. So a tiny sliver of this. But a school choice program was struck down by the Supreme Court, arguing that it was direct taking of public money to private schools. And again, Dylan, this is a decision that these are all justices appointed by Republicans.
So you're in favor of school choice, correct?
I would argue that the best accountability for education is the accountability of the marketplace. Yes.
Does the regime that the legislators put in place remove any funding from public schools, or is it kind of its own pool of money?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. It was actually a trust fund that was set up, and yes, it is independent. It takes no money away from the government-run system. And in fact, Chief Justice John Kittredge, in a scathing dissent of this ruling, striking down the choice program, pointed out that public schools have been given massive funding increases over the years, which, by the way, have absolutely failed to produce any measurable gains on NAEP, Nation's Report Card, any apples-to-apples national tests.
Well, and I'm with you that the South Carolina public school system is clearly not working. I'm with you that school choice is, broadly speaking, a good thing. But I read the ruling last night. I mean, I want to read this section of the South Carolina Constitution here. This is Article 11, Section 4. Direct aid to religious or other private educational institutions is prohibited. No money shall be paid from the public funds, nor shall the credit of the state or any of its political subdivisions be used for the direct benefit of any religious or other private educational institution. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry. This is taking money from the state coffers, putting it into a trust fund, and then allowing parents to distribute it to a private or religious school. Even if you think that's a good idea, this is pretty nakedly unconstitutional.
But what you just said? Put it in a trust fund, give it to parents, then parents then make it. That sounded like at least 3 steps there, Dylan.
Right, but that's like if the Constitution said that you can't take money from your left pocket and spend it at a private school, and then you say, well, I took it from my left pocket, put it in my right pocket, and then spend it at a private school. I can understand, as somebody who supports school choice,
fair enough,
how a reasonable justice could come to this conclusion, because the text is very clear. And I don't really understand why our lawyer legislators in the State House couldn't look at our Constitution and design some statute that does not obviously violate it.
Well, and one of them is, and we were going to get him in the studio hopefully this coming year. You've talked to him at some press conferences. Jordan Pace has a school choice bill which would create a non-refundable tax credit, which would hopefully resolve all these constitutional
Because the money
issues.
never flows to the state in the first place.
Exactly.
This is a constitutional program.
Exactly. But the other interesting part of this Supreme Court ruling, Dylan, we've got a First Steps program here in South Carolina, which sends millions of dollars every year to private and some religious pre-K programs. We've got life scholarships, Hope scholarships, massive amounts of money going to higher ed, including private higher ed institutions, state dollars. So one of the other things that Justice Kittredge noted in his dissent of this ruling was that, look, guys, you are literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. There's a ton of perhaps unintended consequences. I don't know, but whether it's K through 12, pre-K, or higher ed, this is happening all up and down that scale, and we've now basically issued a ruling that says all of it is unconstitutional.
It will certainly be interesting to see if other parties bring challenges to those programs before the court, and to see how the court reacts. It's kind of too early to know, because the mechanisms by which those programs are funded are not the exact same trust, left pocket to right pocket mechanism that this program used. So we'll see if they survive challenges in the court, or if plaintiffs will even challenge them in the courts. I guess you would assume that now that there's blood in the water, that somebody's going to try to bring a case, but it certainly could have outsized impacts beyond just this program.
Well, Dylan, you've done a great job covering a bunch of these State House issues. Looking forward to seeing how this one plays out as the 2025 session. Not that far away. We'll have pre-filing on bills in December. I actually spoke with Representative Jordan Pace, the sponsor of that non-refundable tax credit bill. He told me he is introducing that again in this coming session. He'll be pre-filing it, so we look forward to seeing how that plays out, not only in the courts, as you mentioned, but also in the policy arena. Dylan, thanks again for your analysis, not only on the State House, but on the Ukraine situation, the presidential election. You got any bold predictions as we head out of this week?
I'm not going to touch the crystal ball anymore here. I'm not going to test my luck, but I'm happy to have been on.
Good stuff, Dylan. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this week's edition of the Week in Review. I want to thank Jen, Andy, and Dylan for their work. Also want to thank Victoria Smith. For those of you who don't know her, Victoria's Verdict going to be a standout here on this show. We're going to bring her in as an in-house legal analyst very soon. But for now, VictoriaSmithLegal.com. Check it out for all your personal injury needs. Also want to send a shout out to our friends at the South Carolina Election Commission, scvotes.gov. If you haven't already registered for the 2024 general election, folks, do it now. That deadline's coming up in the next couple weeks. But scvotes.gov, that's where you need to go. They've got all the information about where you need to register, how you need to register. You can, in fact, do it online, as we talked about in that earlier segment. And in case you didn't notice from that past conversation, it's a very important election. So if you haven't already registered, folks, go do that at scvotes.gov. We'll catch you next time on the Week in Review.